Hello, my name is Graham Cranston-Cuevas, and on behalf of the William Mary DC Alumni Board, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to today's virtual fireside chat with Her Excellency Karin Olofsdotter, Ambassador of Sweden to the United States, moderated by fellow William Mary alum and former Senior Director at the White House National Security Council, Kirsten Fontenrose. A few logistical details before I turn the discussion over to the Ambassador and Ms. Fontenrose. Today's conversation is held as part of the Washington, D.C. Alumni Board Spring Programming, which includes virtual events as well as in-person events held throughout the Washington, D.C. metro area to engage William Mary alumni, student and parent communities across the region. Please join the Facebook group, William Mary Washington, D.C. Alumni Chapter, to hear about all of our upcoming events and to get involved. During today's discussion, we encourage the audience to submit questions via the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of your screen at any point in the conversation. We will take as many questions as we can in the audience QA at the end of the moderated conversation. Without further ado, I am delighted to introduce today's moderator, one of William Mary's foremost alumni in national security, who recently served as Senior Director for the Gulf at the White House National Security Council. In addition to being one of the most impactful and sought after commentators in national security affairs, Ms. Fontenrose is President of Red 6 International and a non-resident senior fellow at the Washington, D.C. based think tank, the Atlantic Council. Thank you all again for joining us today. I'll turn things over to Ms. Fontenrose to introduce the ambassador.
Thank you, Graham, and welcome to everyone again on behalf of the College of William and Mary to this very special fireside chat with Her Excellency Karin Olofsdotter, the Ambassador of Sweden to the United States. Ambassador, it is an absolute delight to have you with us today, particularly during a week when Sweden is so central to the issues at the forefront of US-European relations. And for those of you who have not had the pleasure of meeting the ambassador, allow me to acquaint you briefly with her background and experience before we pick her brain. Ambassador Olofsdotter's career in the Swedish Foreign Service began in 1994 with her first posting at the Embassy of Sweden in Moscow, only 3 years after the USSR dissolved. It must have been a fascinating time to be there. And we will ask the ambassadors for reflections on this time as we look at Russian actions today. I can't imagine during our conversation. In the years that followed her post in Moscow, the ambassador worked in security policy and defense issues, as well as in numerous leadership posts within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Continuing in the vein of security and defense policy, she served as part of the Swedish delegation to NATO and with the Swedish EU Representation Office in Brussels. In 2008, she was appointed Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of Sweden in Washington, D.C. So her time with us here is a second homecoming. In 2011, she took her first ambassadorial post as ambassador to Sweden, or of Sweden to Hungary. Prior to returning to DC to lead the Swedish mission to the US, Ambassador Olofsdotter served as Director General for Trade at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She also held the position of Deputy Director General and head of the Department for Promotion of Sweden Trade and CSR, adding trade alongside defense and security to her portfolio of expertise. The ambassador has a BA in psychology, economics, and Russian. She studied at UCLA Anderson School of Management and speaks Russian, French, and English, though we will only ask her to speak in one of those today. So, Madam Ambassador, it is such a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you again for being so generous with your time at a really important moment in global history and certainly in US-European dynamics. Our conversation takes place in the midst of this once-in-a-century pandemic, a global supply chain upheaval. We've got rising inflation, energy uncertainty. We've got recently renewed Russian aggression in Eastern Europe that I hope to dig into. To start us off, with this array of challenges in mind, what keeps you up at night? What is Sweden watching most closely?
Well, unfortunately, well, thank you first of all for having me, and it's fantastic to see you as well, Kirsten. And I can't see the alumni or people on this who are here now, but I hope to meet you sometime in person. This, I guess, is the little silver lining of COVID, that we actually do all these things on Zoom. So that's great. No, thank you for that. Well, unfortunately to say, it is Russia and Ukraine right now. I cannot believe. Now, I mean, I know there are wars around the globe, you know, constantly and all the time, which are just awful and terrible and all that, but there hasn't been one so close to my home for a very long time. Of course, we had the annexation of Crimea in 2014. We had the Balkan Wars and you know, all those horrible things. But to just sit and wait to see if there's going to be an attack on another. I mean, there's already been with the recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk. But to sit and wait to see if there are actually going to be bombardments or people killed or whatever, it's just unreal. So that of course keeps me awake, and I think it's surreal, actually, as I said. Yeah, so that's of course keeping me very busy these days. It feels like almost all other issues have come on the back burner, but the world is spinning even when this is happening. So of course I'm following very closely political issues going on here that will impact Sweden. Right now, it's of course the CHIPS Act in Congress. That's very important to us, given that Sweden is actually the 15th largest investor in the United States. We carry companies like Ericsson, ABB, AstraZeneca. We have big steel plants in your country. We employ 375,000 people in the United States, and you are our fourth biggest market. So of course, anything that happens here on the trade side and the technology side is of paramount importance to us. And I also follow very closely how the United States relationship with China is developing. We have same concerns as you have when it comes to China regarding human rights and all those issues, but also when it comes to their trade policy with dumping of steel, how we have unfair competition when it comes to the rollout of 5G, for instance, where it's very hard for us and you to compete with the price that a company like Huawei can offer, and that in that next turn actually ties into security. How do we look on Chinese investments? My country, just like yours, have a very tough investment screening policy. But how do we develop all this across the Atlantic so that we stand stronger together, that we set the rules and parameters for new technology? At the same time, of course, we want to have a relationship with the Chinese people and the Chinese market and so on. So how do we balance this in a wise way? So those are just a few of the things. And then, of course, I can go on, but I'm very happy that the United States is back on the international climate arena. I know a lot of important climate-related work has been going on in this country, despite that you left the Paris Accord. Locally, there's lots happening, which we are, of course, interested in, but it's fantastic that you are back as a global advocate for, trying to mitigate the risks of climate change. The same thing goes with democracy. Of course, we're so happy and so grateful that you are taking the lead on how to treat democracy and so on. So there are lots of issues, just to name a few.
This is fantastic. You've essentially set the scene for a lot of this conversation. This is wonderful. And I may even skip ahead in my notes a bit and dive down into some of the topics you raised, and then we can pull back out, maybe end on some lighter notes. But if you don't mind, since you brought up the topic of Russian aggression, you brought up things like climate change. Let's dig into those a bit. In addition to your experience in Moscow, you were also in 2001 the chairman of the EU political military group during the Swedish presidency of the EU. So you have some insights that are far beyond the typical diplomat in terms of thoughts, the way Moscow conducts calculus on the foreign policy stage. So earlier this month, Swedish Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs Wallenstein met with U.S. National Security Advisor Sullivan, and they discussed their shared concerns about the Russian military buildup. How concerned, in your opinion, is Sweden with Russian attempts to reassert its freedom of action in the Baltic Sea, whether this is through overt naval maneuvers or through diplomacy or cyber, to perhaps pressure the Baltics into non-activity? What are Sweden's main concerns here?
No, I mean, this is something we have seen for a long time. Of course, we were all taken aback by, first of all, the attacks in Georgia in 2008, and also cyber attacks on Estonia. And then, of course, 2014 was, I think, a watershed-shedding moment. And since then, we have really, ramped up our own defense. We had, during the Cold War, we are not a member of NATO. And during the Cold War, we created, we had our own security. How do you say? We were not part of the Warsaw Pact. We were not part of NATO. We were neutral and militarily non-aligned. So we had a very strong defense. People don't realize that, because when you say you're neutral, people think that you're kind of just bunny huggers. But I think we spent 4 or 5% of our GDP on defense in those days. We had a very strong defense. We still have. But of course, with the dismantling of the Soviet Union, things changed, and we all thought there would be kind of eternal peace. So we dismantled quite a bit of what we had. We have a very big defense industry, which we have since the Cold War, to make our own situation stronger, and so we wouldn't have to rely on anyone. As I said, we were neutral and military non-aligned. So we then, when we have seen what's going on in our vicinity. So 5 years ago, we had a new defense decision. So we are increasing our defense spending with 40% during 5 years. That's quite a lot. And we are, going back to conscript army, which we had during the Cold War. It's not, we don't draft everyone these days, much smaller numbers, but we are back to a conscript army. We have our own air fighter jet system that we build. We are ramping that up as well with new models. We are building new submarines. We are building new military bases in Sweden. So we are really increasing and doing much more for our own security, because this is what we've seen. So we have been a little bit worried about the stance of the United States the last 4 or 5 years. We see and understand the focus on China, but we were worried that you didn't see Russia as a military threat. And we even got those kind of signals from your administrations. So that made us worried, because that was not a picture we shared. And today, unfortunately, we have to say we were right. So it's really hard to read, I think. We're all kind of armchair psychologists these days, trying to read the mind of Putin. Why is this happening? And there are so many reasons that one can attribute to this. But what we see today is a very aggressive Russia. And of course, the last few days have really proven that. So we are, really worried. We are worried that the European security order is in limbo. And for us, even if we are not a member of NATO, it's extremely important. It's existential that every country has the right to choose its own security path. So if we one day would like to join NATO, that's our decision, not someone else's decision. And the same goes for the Ukraine, of course, and for every country. So this worries us greatly, actually. But I think what has been positive, if one can say anything has been positive these days, is that the United States and Europe are walking really hand in hand in addressing the crisis. Just the sanctions packages that came out, there's a little bit of difference, but very little. And we are also aligned on that we will, if something even more serious happen, ramp up the response. So yeah, that's how we see it right now.
I would guess that based on the 8 years since that 2014 watershed, moment you referenced, and based on the fact that you have been doing so much as a country to beef up your own defense sector, that there would be new thinking in Sweden about the benefits of NATO membership, and also perhaps a bit of pressure on the part of NATO members to bring Sweden's defense capacity into that fold. Can you talk a little bit about what?
Well, first of all, we are an enhanced partner to NATO. So Sweden and Finland and a few other countries have that partnership with NATO. So we're as close to NATO as you can be without being a formal member. So, and that's a cooperation that we really cherish, and it's very important for us. So right now, the Swedish government says that we are not, NATO membership is not on the table. We are increasing our cooperation, as we said, with NATO right now. We have an extremely close relationship to Finland, also a non-NATO member, and with the United States, and of course with other partners in our region as well. So that's kind of how we see our security set up, and we are happy with that now, if one can say happy these days. But it's working very well, and we feel that the United States is very interested in the cooperation we have. The last opinion polls for NATO membership, I think, shows 46 or 48% in favor of joining NATO, so that has gone up. This is a discussion that goes up and down. So every 10 years or so, there's a discussion on it. But of course, we haven't had a discussion like we're having now for a long time because of these reasons. So we have an election in the fall. as some of the opposition parties have NATO membership on the agenda. But personally, and I'm really now talking as not as the ambassador, but as me, as Karin, I think you will have to see kind of support numbers up in the 60s, 70% for things really to change. Because as my foreign minister said, imagine if we have a referendum on NATO membership and it becomes a no. Then that's a done deal. So there's a debate. We are not changing anything now. The government's position is that you shouldn't do these kind of changes to your security policy, particularly when you are in a crisis. Then stability and predictability is really important. So we feel that the setup we have now is working fine for us. But as the government says, you never know what's happening in the future.
Is that public debate centered on questions about sovereignty or questions about inciting Russia? Where do you think that public debate really divides on membership?
Well, it's hard to say. Some who have been skeptical. I mean, you must remember, we have been neutral, as we say, or military non-aligned since 1814. It's 200 years. We were not part of the First World War. We were not part of the Second World War. And then we have taken part in every crisis management operation that NATO has held as a partner, most UN operations as well, a lot of UN operations. So we are really a country that takes part in peacekeeping and those kind of big operations around the world. And we have done that since the Second World War, basically. So we really feel that we are a security provider, but it's very, given 200 years of neutrality and military non-alignedness, this is something that's kind of ingrained in the Swedish psyche, you could say, for historical reasons. So, and also some who are critical of joining NATO are critical because of that NATO has nuclear weapons, or the countries who are members have nuclear weapons. So there's quite a strong anti-nuclear lobby in Sweden. Some feel that it's still important to be independent, to be military non-aligned. That's what contributes mostly to our security. Others feel that we should really join out of solidarity reasons. Others see that it's something that a NATO membership would enhance our security even further. So there's so many reasons against and for.
Right, makes perfect sense. I want to ask you a question that sort of draws on your Russia expertise and your trade expertise, transitioning this a little bit. We're watching this transition of renewables in Europe, including in Scandinavia. And do you think the Russian state under Putin can afford its current landmass, maintaining control over its current landmass without making big changes in economic diversification? And then what would this mean for the European security landscape going forward? Your answer about whether they can or they can't.
Well, of course, the greener Europe, is there an echo? No, the greener Europe becomes, the more we go for renewable energy, or if some countries go for more nuclear or alternative energy sources, and the more we get rid of dependence on gas and oil, which is the big export areas of Russia. Of course, and this of course takes time, but if you look 20, 30 years down the road, I don't think the appetite for those products will be very big. So that will, of course, in the long run, hurt the Russian Federation. And as I perceive it, I think I have seen that the Russian and the Putin administration have moved on climate change. Before, a couple of years ago, they were much more negative, but now they are have been more inclined to look at it seriously, etc., which is good. But of course, I think that will, in the long run, how do you say, if there are no alternative use for for oil and gas that make them clean? I mean, who knows what we invent in the future? I hope the Russians can find other economic models and so on. I don't think it's something that right now is part of their security thinking, but maybe further down the road, depending what happens in Europe when it comes to our energy consumption. Luckily, Sweden is a country where we are not dependent on oil and gas from Russia. Our energy mix is 40% nuclear, 40% hydro. You have to be lucky with your geography, I guess. And also the rest is other renewable sources. So for us, we are not, of course, if the gas and oil is turned off to Europe, we see that the prices will go up, and that will also affect the prices of energy in Sweden. But we don't import it ourselves. We don't need it.
Right. I mean, to your point, we've seen the energy prices in Sweden skyrocket alongside in recent weeks, even with this mix that includes, 80% made up from nuclear and hydroelectric, as you mentioned, which is really admirable. We saw that the Swedish energy minister remarked that our Swedish consumers should not have to suffer to this degree due to, among other things, Russia's behavior on the European energy market when rolling out an aid package to offset energy prices for families. I mean, we've had to dip into our strategic reserves here as well.
Yeah.
How does the current energy crisis impact the outlook for Swedish energy policy? How will the climate movement and global energy providers work together in your vision, if you can predict that, to stabilize prices during this period of transition?
Yes, I mean, like right now, of course, like you say, we are contemplating how we can support the general public when it comes to energy because of the spikes that we see right now. But in the longer term, we put a lot of effort in becoming carbon neutral or diminishing our carbon footprint. We have already done so. Since early 1990s, we introduced a carbon tax at a very low level that has then increased gradually. If you're going to introduce carbon tax, you can't do it at a high level. You have to get industry used to it so they can absorb it. So we have cut emissions by 30%, I believe it is, or 27% since 1990, but we have grown our economy by like 80% at the same time. So we are proof that you can change and grow your economy because, of course, you grow in other sectors and creativity is there. And we have a very interesting program right now called Fossil Free Sweden, which is actually 22 different sectors of business that have taken it upon themselves to reduce their carbon footprints by, some industries by 2035 and 50%. And, it varies, but you have everything from the cement industry to the steel industry to the construction sector, to the retail industry, and so on, that have put up roadmaps. And in those roadmaps, they also suggest to the politicians which reforms they need to make this happen. So this is, I think, a really good example of like bottom-up approach where the industries comes up with the plans, needs help from public policy to make it happen, and the politicians listen. So we now have the first fossil-free steel plant in the world, in the northern part of Europe. So, this is great news.
Is this the kind of thing that you all are offering as a model to other countries, or is it more the type of industry where you're saying this is actually one of Sweden's differentiators? It gives us an economic leg up on the global stage. So we'd prefer to keep this kind of technology close hold. Is this part of Sweden's plan for future diversification?
No,
or is it something Sweden is saying we want everyone on board?
I hope they patent it. I'm sure they have patented it. But, those steel plants that do have SSAB and another one called Hybrid, they have big steel plants in the US. So the technology can be brought here as well. Eventually, they have their first kind of, how do you say it? Test batches. It will be up and running by 2025 for big commercial use. So all the car companies are interested in this because, of course, this reduces the carbon footprint of the vehicle production and so on. So there's great possibilities. And so the Swedish investments that we have here will, of course, bring new technology here as well, which will benefit the American people.
Sure. Can you tell us a bit about Sweden's priorities on the global stage, other than what we're dealing with this week with Russia and Ukraine? Where is Sweden most involved or most interested around the world? What other policy priorities do you have globally?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, bilateral relations with various countries and our EU membership and being, a strong player within the European Union on all the issues that are important to us is, of course, center of our policy, of our foreign policy. But being an EU member, it's almost like domestic policy because the European Union I sometimes try to liken it. It's, this country is not called the United States, it's the United States of America. So you can see that the construction of the United States is in a way similar to the European Union, where some things are national responsibilities and some responsibilities are joint. Just like here in a way, it's just a different thing. But so of course, what goes on in the European Union on anything from energy policy to foreign policy is extremely important for us. So that's where we put our, biggest effort. Then we have, of course, policy areas that we are kind of have overarching priorities, and democracy is one of those. Spreading democracy. We are also, just like you, worried about what we see with creeping authoritarian regimes, less weakening democratic systems, and so on. So we were very happy when the Biden administration announced it would have focus on democracy and had the Summit for Democracy, and we actually got to play quite a big role in that. So that's really important for us. Second of all, sorry, yes.
No, please keep going.
No, and another area which we also work on is, of course, gender equality. And Sweden was the first country that declared it had a feminist government. That was done in 2014, and it took a man to declare a feminist government, and that was our former Prime Minister Stefan Löfven. So gender issues and equality is really at the center of everything we do. So we always, both domestically and in our foreign policy, we always have to do a gender analysis. What does this mean for men and women? And does this policy or whatever harm women and girls and children? So that's an analysis we always do. We always have to do it for domestic policy when they put up a proposal on traffic or something. You have to do a gender analysis. And more often than not, it's actually important. You see that the result changes if you have done that, which usually benefits both men and women. So that's important. And when it comes to foreign policy, then we focus on rights of women, resources of women, and representation, political representation of women. And this is something we do if it's peace operations or if it's development cooperation, what it is, we always do it. We work a lot on it here in the United States as well, together with American partners, talking about gender issues. So that's important for us. Of course, we are not perfect. We've been at it though for a long time. And to you American friends, I can say that we have 480 days of parental leave per child, and one parent has to take 3 months, 90 days out of those. Otherwise, you lose it. And of course, that's geared towards men usually, because women take more parental leave. So, and most people actually keep 80% of their salary when they are on parental leave. So this has led to that we have a very high labor participation of women, around 80%, and I believe it's 67 or 70% in your country, or even less maybe. So it's something that's both good for family, demography, and for economy. And also one reason why we have this is that in the early 70s, we stopped with joint taxation of married couples. So we're all individually taxed, and that also made women want to work. And then we got the daycare centers, and then over time we have developed the parental leave system. Then sustainability, we've already talked about, extremely important, of course, in everything we do. And across the board political spectrum in Sweden, everyone agrees. So we never have any arguments about that, is climate real or not, or that kind of discussions. There are discussions on how to go about fighting climate change, but mostly there's great agreement on it. And then, of course, the security piece that we've talked about. So even if we're a small country, we have, we have interest in most everything, in most policy areas. And with just coming back to the United States, with you, we have a very long relationship going back to 1638. We actually had a colony here once in Delaware. You can visit it, and there's a replica of the boat which people came over with. It's a great excursion, and it sails. And then 1/3 of our population came to the United States in the 19th century. So that actually drove, as I said, we were neutral since 1814. We had been in basically every war you could imagine up till then. Our coffers were empty. We had to import a new crown prince from France. And he realized when he came to Sweden that it was big, but not as grand maybe as he thought. And his idea was then that we should become neutral, and he would play a role as a peacemaker. So that's the story behind it. But I mean, we were really poor at the time. And then we had also the famines, like, you had in Ireland, etc. And we had religious persecution. So a lot of people left. But that then led to the transformation of the Swedish society, because of course the politicians, realized that all the able people, a lot of able people left. So we got voting rights for men, we got general schooling for everyone from, I think, 1860 sometime. And then also with luck with innovations and industrialization, that then changed the Swedish society gradually to what we are today, with the social security protection system, welfare state, and market economy and so on. So the foundation of the United States plays a big role in who we are today, actually. And as I said, you are a fourth biggest market. I don't think there's any Swedish entrepreneur who doesn't have the dream of making it big in the United States.
And some of the things you mentioned in Swedish history, things like famines and religious persecution, are common to so many nations' histories, and even some nations' current events. And yet Sweden built its economy, experienced periods of innovation, sort of these really positive outcomes from things that can be so negative and so difficult for countries to overcome. Do you feel like there are any lessons learned from the Swedish experience that other countries could look to or draw from in terms of also coming out with a culture of innovation and a culture of equalizing citizens from periods of difficulty, like famines, like religious persecution?
Of course, this is something that we have been working on for over hundreds of years. And of course, it's not something that just comes. And I think the role of social that we had, for 44 years almost in a row, the Social Democrats were elected in power for a long time. So it was politically the same part. And the welfare state that was created after the Second World War, it has great support in society. So there's never any debate about the system as such. There can be a debate about, level of taxations, but then usually, in America would, probably laugh when you hear the debates on taxation in Sweden, because like one party would say, raise the taxes 1%. The other one would say, no, lower it 1%. So I'm joking now, and of course, but the political stability has been there for so long. And it's basically the Social Democrats were in power for a very long time, from Second World War till the early 90s. And then we've started to change. So we have elections every 4 years, but sometimes the conservatives are in power, sometimes the Social Democrats with support of others are in power. And personally, I think that's healthy. We have a healthy democracy. We have a large participation rate in our elections, huge numbers. We have elections on Sundays, which can be recommended, because then people can go vote. And it's also always on the second Sunday of September every fourth year. So in that sense, a very stable democracy. And of course, we live in a very fortunate part of the world where we don't have natural catastrophes. We haven't had war. No, we have had wars, gruesome wars, of course, but it's been stable for a long time. And also, like in any country, there's huge debate about our school system. We are dropping in ranking, etc. But still, after Switzerland, we're the most innovative country in the world. So there's something to how, and I personally, that's me again, I personally think that our social welfare net, somehow helps, because that the risk of you losing your home, even if you lose your job, it's not really there. So there's some sort of, there is protection. It doesn't mean that you keep your salaries, or you have to lower your standard quite a lot, but you don't have to leave your house usually if something bad's happened, if you go bankrupt or something like that. There's more of a stigma though of going bankrupt in Sweden than it is here in the United States. Here it's more like, okay, you stand up and you go again. In my country it's more shameful, which is a pity, because if you don't try and fail, where do you go? So that's something I really admire about your culture, this kind of can-do spirit that you have. So it's, I think it's hard to give those recommendations, because we're all so different through history, geography, and so on. And every country has to build their own societies. But I do think that, we're a very secular society. Religion doesn't play a very big role in our society, and that's not where we have our differences, really. So we have lots of challenges. Now it sounds like, we're just paradise on earth. We have lots of issues that are tough in our society that we are dealing with, and so on. But for the for the big part in comparison to a lot of other places. We're still like ranked top 10 on most things. That doesn't mean that it can't get better.
No, but that's an impressive ranking, and the aspiration to continue to rise in any of those is probably what keeps Sweden in those rankings so high. That culture of innovation that feeds the ongoing success. Let me ask you, as if we were sitting over coffee, kind of behind closed doors, one of the problems the US has when we go to speak about democracy or about equality or the like with other countries, one is sometimes our own track record, but it's often that we're seen as sort of preaching, and it doesn't come off very well. It's not received very well. When Sweden has conversations with other governments or other countries about things like advancing democracy or things like modeling a feminist foreign policy, how is it received? Do you all have tips on ways to hold these kinds of conversations where the listener is receptive instead of shutting it down like we often experience?
No, I think that's the difference between you being a superpower and we being an ex-superpower, which we were in the 17th century, but that's a while ago. No, but of course, people or countries usually realize that we don't have a hidden agenda. Our influence is not such as yours. So of course, I guess other countries can be more skeptical when the United States comes rolling in because they don't know what is your agenda. I mean, they can wonder about your agenda. They don't really do that when we come because we are smaller. We have, we give 1% of our GDP in corporate development aid. I think you give 0.15% or something like that. Of course, in numbers, you're huge because your economy is so big. But I think because also we've been around the world with our development cooperation for so long, people have seen what we are doing. So that also, carries respect. But I think a lot of it is this, that we're not seen as a threat as you can be seen as, rightly or wrongly.
So give up our position as a superpower and we'll
no, don't do that.
Don't better chance of
Please
advancing.
Don't. We need you. Don't do that. I guess, but isn't it so that there's a saying like if you're big, you have to be more careful or nicer or
Right. Yes. Not so heavy-handed, right? Let me ask you about your time here in Washington. Looking back at your first days as ambassador, you had already served as the Swedish deputy chief of mission during the Obama-Biden administration, and you spent a great deal of time getting to know the US long before that. So as someone who knows the post perhaps more than any other Swedish official, what has been the most unexpected challenge you've faced so far as ambassador? Or if you can't narrow it down to one on the spot, just perhaps your comments on differences you've seen in Washington or things that surprised you.
Well, I mean, first of all, I just want to underline how much I love your country. This is the fourth time I live here. I was an exchange student in New Jersey at high school in the southern parts of New Jersey. As you said, I studied at UCLA. I've lived in DC before, and I just love your country and the people and everything. What worries me and struck me when I came back, of course, I was here during the financial crisis last time, which was a big blow to all of us, of course. But I think it also revealed, or maybe it had been revealed before, but I didn't know it, the big need of big reforms that your country needs. And President Trump was, looking into the infrastructure, which is, I think, a huge issue here that you really need to tackle for your competition and for lots of reasons, of course. It didn't work. He didn't get packages through. Now there are packages through, but I guess more is needed. That's extremely important. I know the need for healthcare reform, and I have no view on how you build your healthcare system. But just as an example, you pay around 18 or 19% of GDP for your healthcare. Most European countries or OECD countries pay around 10. And average life expectancy, you are have a 3 years lower life expectancy than the OECD average. And you pay. So to me, that says that maybe a reform is needed to make it more efficient. You have the best healthcare in the world if you have access to it. But a lot of people don't. I think that's also something that's very important in your society. If I have advice for you, then just like us, you are slipping on when it comes to general education. We both have the similar challenges there. That's one of the most important education, general education for the big, bulk of people. That's one of the most important things we have to put focus on, because that's innovation, that's future jobs, that's all that. That is very difficult. It's difficult for us as well. But those are things where I have been maybe surprised that it's been so hard for the political parties to join hands and try to solve those, because both parties see the same needs, but doesn't seem to be able to agree on how to do it. And I think this is both extremely important for the US society, for you as a people, but it's also important for us because, as I said, we build our security on a relationship with you. And I believe that if the United States is not able to solve this crisis, you will be even more inward looking, which is not strange. But your appetite to be that transatlantic partner maybe will diminish then. I mean, if I'm looking forward for 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And that's, of course, not the development we want, because you are the biggest democracy in the world and you are extremely important. So I really, really hope that that your politicians can agree on these so important reforms for your society. And I'm not saying that, I mean, we have so many challenges ourselves as well, so it's not like me sitting here on a high horse, but I really think it's important.
That was actually exactly what I was about to ask. Are there topics, some of those that you mentioned, going US to Sweden and Sweden to the US, where you think Sweden could really use America's help with some advice or some clarity or some lessons learned on fill in the blank, like you mentioned, education slipping a bit or whatever it would be? And are there topics where you think we've kind of figured this out through trial and error? We've had a couple hundred more years than you have, America, and it would probably be useful for the US to listen to some of Sweden's experiences on these topics? Anything where you think that our policymakers aren't really seeing yet the value that the others
I can just bring? If you look at the whole, look at garbage, waste management, you guys are so behind. We have whole cities now, or suburbs, which are kind of self-generating energy-wise, because they recycle the garbage is recycled to energy in their systems. We put 1% of our waste in landfills. I don't know how many percent you put. So just that, recycling is one thing. For instance, I mean, these are just small issues, but things where you could learn from us. So we hope that you will send. We have a big kind of city fair, how to build cities in next year in the southern part of Sweden, and I do believe quite a few American cities will come and visit to see that. What I love about, and I think what we can learn from you, is this kind of fundamental positivity and that you can move around. It's become less in the United States now than before, but that you have this extremely positive outlook, and I don't know how you foster it. It's something that's remarkable. What I think many times it's very difficult to compare Sweden with the United States on a federal level, because we are only 10 million people. So we are more like a state. So I try to get Swedish politicians to go out to various states and visit and meet with the local, governor and the local parliaments, because their challenges are more similar. And also, like, education is a state responsibility. So that's where you can have a good conversation about how do we solve these kind of hands-on issues. In your capital here, we of course talk about defense and security, but I think it's much more relevant, actually, as a small country, to look at what you're doing out in the States.
That's a great point. And to that topic, we're getting some questions in from the audience, and I want to ask you one of them to start, because it's certainly a topic for us that is a federal issue, but battle, the debate occurs mostly on a state-by-state level, and that is about immigration. Are you, with the elections coming up that you were talking about, are you seeing in Sweden any issues of immigration playing into political party platforms or the future of Sweden writ large?
Mm-hmm. Yes, since I guess the war in Syria, I mean, we have always had lots of immigration, which we have welcomed over the years. So, we had lots of people from Chile when the coup was in Chile in the 70s. The war in the Balkans, 100,000 people came from former Yugoslavia. As we were not in the war, Second World War, our economy was booming. So we needed lots of migrants to work, in our factories. So lots of people came from Greece and Italy and so on. So we have always had that, and we've always also taken in refugees. But then when the war in Syria came and it was decided, we got an influx of 150,000 people coming in a year. And, a country of 10 million, that's a lot. So there was a big debate then on how many people can we absorb? Can we treat them well so they get a good welcoming and a good start in Sweden and so on? And many people found out that we were maybe not up to speed with that really. A long time to go through the asylum process, long time to get a job, lots of debate on where new Swedes can live. Right? It's been a law that you could basically live where you wanted, which meant that as when America was fine, people want to live with their own. So you had Little Italy here and Chinatown, and all the Swedes went to one place. Of course, same when people came to Sweden, but that meant that there were big areas where no, kind of ethnic Swedes, or what you would call us, lived, and much harder to get a job. So those are these discussions we are having right now. Integration is a huge piece. How do we integrate and make sure that the people who have come to our country actually, get to their first job and are able to support themselves? So that would be a big issue in the election coming up in September.
Sure. I remember being in Gothenburg when the war was on, and being part of some conversations with some Syrian Swedish civil society members who said, you're going to get such large numbers and our community can't absorb them. So please rethink the policy of opening the doors completely. We're just not prepared for that. And being, as an American, being so surprised and amazed by this policy of come one, come all, but then hearing their civil society members sort of speak honestly about what they thought their capacity for absorption was, and thinking, wow, this could really be a challenge. And yet in the years since, Sweden has managed it with aplomb, I think. So it'll be interesting to track.
I think what our politicians always say is that it's also other EU member states need to, pull their weight and also help out to be there. It can't be just a few countries in the union who helps out with the refugees. So we must all, do our share.
Do you have conversations with US policymakers about that topic?
It's funny, I many times get a question what I think about illegal immigration. I'm like, well, illegal immigration is always illegal. And so in my country, there's, either you immigrate legally and you go through the process, and if you get the rejection, you will have to be sent back to your country. That's, of course, difficult to actually, because many countries where people have fled from don't accept their people back. So it's a hard thing, but there is a legal process. And that's how it's done. Now it's easier. I mean, I completely understand the whole political, dilemma in the United States and the borders and all that. We're surrounded by waters. It's not like you can just walk in. So it's of course easier for us to say to have an orderly asylum process, but that's different. That's a very different conversation.
It's a great point, right? We've got a couple of questions coming in specific to the Russia-Ukraine issue. And one that keeps appearing is, what is Sweden's position toward Russia and Ukraine in light of Russia's nullification of the Minsk agreement by sending troops into Ukraine's Donbas region in support of separatists there?
Well, of course, that's extremely upsetting. This is not in agreement with the Minsk Accords. And it's a violation of international law. So extremely serious. As your mom, you would say, you just don't do that. No, that's our view. And we are very worried about what this will actually mean. Given that also the Russians said, as I said initially, that the border they kind of recognized the whole oblast, the whole county, or whatever you would say, not just the part that they had already taken from before. So what will happen now with that stretch of land till the county borders?
Do you have, since you have more insight into kind of how Russia thinks about these topics based on your diplomatic experience and your analysis experience and your experience, with the EU in Russia-specific roles, if you could design an end to this dispute on your own, with acknowledging the concerns on both NATO and the US and the Western Europe side, and some of Russia's concerns, do you think there is a balance? Do you think there is a happy middle? What would that look like? And again, this is you as an expert on both Russia and Western Europe, not so much as an ambassador to the US.
Of course, I mean, I don't know if you read Friedman's piece and Jeffrey Sachs' piece, Financial Times and New York Times yesterday, I believe it was, where they say that, it was wrong to expand NATO when Russia was weak. I think that's extremely tough to say. Maybe there's something to that, but then again, every country has to be able to choose its own security. And given what our friends who were coming out of the Soviet bloc had experienced, no wonder that they wanted that option or wanted to go for a membership and get that before even they were interested in joining the European Union. It was all about their security because they had experienced Russia over the centuries. So it's so easy to sit far away and have a view on this if you haven't lived it yourself. So I can only come back to that. We have those agreements and which the Russians also have signed on to, that, everyone should choose their own security. And I personally don't believe that. I think it's a false narrative spun in Russia that NATO and the United States and European allies are a threat to Russia and that we would attack them. No, that's not true. That's something that's fed in Russia, which is absolutely not true. Then, of course, one can realize, see how Russia is perceiving this, that it's, former enemy alliance is always very close on their borders, but we are not a threat. So, this is, maybe there are historic reasons for President Putin to act the way he does, but it's totally unacceptable.
Do you think there's something else behind it based on your analysis of him?
Hard to know. I think, as I said, we're all armchair psychologists these days, trying to understand the man, but what's happening is, of course, totally unacceptable. And even if there is no big attack, I think our security the situation in Europe has changed for a long time, because Putin has showed what he can do with his forces, even if, they are just put on the border and they claim that they are just there for no kind of reason, or it's exercises, etc. But just that you put something so close to another country's border, of course, that creates a lot of instability.
At any time.
What we have seen is that, the NATO, the alliance, have become stronger. Even that there is a debate in my country and in Finland on our security policy. That's, I guess, not what President Putin wanted as well. So if he had the intention of creating cracks in European security, I think he has failed.
Excellent point. Right. We only have a few minutes left, and I want to ask you two far more lighthearted questions. And the first is related to the House of Sweden. So we're beyond delighted that the College of William and Mary will host this year's annual embassy night at the House of Sweden. At the end
yes. Oh, looking forward to that. Absolutely.
Right. Thank you already. And to the audience, if you haven't already, mark your calendar for May 26th and keep an eye out for the invitation in coming weeks. But the reason this is so exceptional in our view is because the House of Sweden is really a landmark in the DC ecosystem, located in the heart of, Georgetown's waterfront, steps in the Potomac River, blocks from the State Department and the White House. It's really kind of in the mix, and it's long-standing. In addition to serving as the embassy in Washington, it's also a testament to Scandinavian modern architecture. It won the Casper Salin Award, I believe, that the most prestigious architectural prize that Sweden gives out. And that's really saying something, considering Sweden's global reputation for architecture. And it's also your home. So if you have a few moments to brag about the House of Sweden, or tell us a bit about its history or why it's so exceptional as a DC landmark, I want to open the floor for that so people can really hear a bit about it.
No, I'm so glad that you will have your evening here. This is really one of the coolest buildings in the US, or in Washington. I mean, we're right on the waterfront in Georgetown, which is very rare in itself if you're not at the Watergate. And also, being such a small country, medium-sized or whatever, to take a decision to build something like this, of course, took a long time and a lot of contemplation in Sweden, because it's costly. But as this is one of the most important capitals in the world, for us to create the landmark here has really put us on the map. And then we decided a few years ago. I lived in a residence that we had since the 40s up by American University, if you know where that is. And unfortunately, it crumbled, so we had to leave it. But then we decided to sell it and realized the original plans for this house to also have the residence of the ambassador here. So given all, the public lunches and dinners and things that I put on and host, and for political discussions, what have you, it's also, it's easier for me to attract interesting people here because it's close, but people also want to come into the house. And I also have, actually, I must brag, one of the best chefs in town. And you wouldn't believe how important it is to have a good chef, because people want to come back and, for seconds. So
you have to be
you will
careful
see when you come
they
here.
poach them.
Yeah, when you come here, you will see in the architecture we have built-in features of, things in Scandinavia, like the Black Lakes in the north. And we have a room that's completely dark, completely black, to give you the feeling of what it's like in the north, in the wintertime and so on. But I'm sure you will love it, and I'm sure you will have a lovely evening here.
That's fantastic. Thank you in advance, so everyone can get excited, maybe do a little research on their own online about the House of Sweden and know what they're walking into. It'll be fantastic. And I want to end by asking you a question, that's kind of the big career reflection question. Since we are joined by young professionals today, by some students, of course, by a lot of alumni, you've referred to yourself in the past as the unlikely diplomat. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that, and what advice you wish you'd received when you were first beginning what has been a distinguished and remarkable career? Is there anything you wish you'd known? And then today, what would you say to young people about pursuing a similar career?
Well, yeah, I am the unlikely diplomat in the sense that I'm an only child of two parents. Most people have two parents. They have only been 6 years in school. They were born early 1930s. I come from a fairly medium-sized town in the southern part of Sweden. Diplomacy was not on my radar. But my parents have always, even though they don't speak English, they've always traveled. They were small business owners in the shoe sector, they had shoe shops and so on. So they were always very positive to, exploring and so on. So from that came this, that I actually went to Russia as a student in 1991. And going here as an exchange student when I was 17, my mother didn't sleep for a year. She was so afraid she would die when I was gone, which of course she didn't. And she was completely healthy, so nothing. But they have always fostered me in this. So I would say I'm an unlikely diplomat in that I never ever dreamed about this. I thought I would work with human resources in Russia. After the fall of the Soviet Union, because I studied psychology, and long story. Then in early 1990s, we had a huge economic crisis in Sweden. There were no jobs. So the few jobs you could apply for was the diplomatic training program. And I thought, I'll send in an application. I will never get that. It's 2,000 people applying, blah, blah, blah. And then because I had Russian, they were interested. And then when they saw my education, they got even more interested, because I was the unlikely one. I was the different one. So it always pays, to me at least, to be different, to find your passion. I didn't know that this was my passion. I could never imagine that, but I would never, ever like to have another job. So don't send me any job offers. No, but I love my job. I love representing my country. I'm very proud of my country. This is a Swedish work environment. I love the way how we work. I'm sure you love the way how an American workplace works, but we're all different. But I always get to see something else. And I managed to have a husband who also likes to move and has come with. And that's, without him, of course, this would not have been possible. So find your passion and find the right partner if you want the partner.
Passion and partner. That's great advice.
Mm-hmm.
And to differentiate yourself by just being a little different, that there's no one
and
path.
Also, I must say, I am a little bit worried about, the younger generation. I can see that in my kids. I don't know how many of you who are here who are in your early 20s, but you have always been able to mirror yourself in social media. So there's this kind of notion that life is perfect. Life is not perfect. And I feel with like my own kids, they don't really dare to take chances. And if there's an opportunity that comes, they're like contemplating, oh, is this the perfect opportunity? Then the opportunity has gone. My life, and I'm sure your life, Kirsten, as well, has been like, oh, there's an opportunity, I'll try this, and then we'll see what happens, because that's how it was. But I think now it's, I think this is the backside of us mirroring ourselves in all others on social media, because no one ever puts up a picture like, I have a lousy day. It's always perfect. And then you're led to believe that that's how life is, and it's not. And I think it will lead you to have less fun.
Completely agree. And fewer successes. Risk aversion leads to non-success, because you can't have a success that when you don't take the chance. Wonderful advice. Wonderful advice. Ambassador, thank you so much for all of your remarkable insights throughout today's conversation. We are so grateful for your time. We're going to be, watching your comments and your embassy's work closely in the coming days and weeks, particularly with regard to the Russia conversation, and we'll certainly be advocating for the US-Sweden relationship.
Please follow us online, both Instagram and Twitter and so on, because we put out a lot on the crisis and how we see it. So if you're interested, please do that. And then
what is the Twitter handle for the embassy?
What's the Twitter? Sweden in USA.
Okay, great. And on Instagram also?
Yes, same one. I'm looking at my
Wonderful.
colleague Alexandra here, who knows everything.
Exactly.
No, but please do. And also, of course, in normal times, now we're just coming out of the pandemic, this is a very lively house with lots of exhibits, concerts, lots of things going on. So if you're in DC, look at our websites where we post our program, and we're also open on the weekends. So you can come in and have a look at our exhibits. We are just now changing exhibits. So please do come.
That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so even before May 26th, people can come in. That's wonderful. What's the new exhibit that's going in?
It's called, what we call it in English?
Arctic Highways.
Yeah, one is called Arctic Highways.
And the other is Her Rights.
And the other one is Her Rights. It's about things that have been important to women.
Wonderful. Oh, fantastic topics. Great. Well, thanks for letting us know about that. So people will inundate your hallways even before our embassy night. It's great to hear.
Well, thank you for being interested in Sweden, and thank you for asking me so many questions.
Thank you for your candor with us. Really grateful. Really appreciate it. Have a fantastic day. Yeah.
Yes, you too. Take care now, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye.